The candlelight flickered across the ancient stone walls of Castle Ravencrest, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with malevolent glee. Outside, a bitter wind howled through the mountain pass, carrying with it the first flakes of what promised to be a brutal winter. Inside the castle's great hall, Duke Alaric Blackthorn stood before the roaring fireplace, his weathered face illuminated by the amber glow as he swirled a glass of crimson wine. "It is settled, then," he said, his voice cutting through the tense silence. "My niece, Lady Alara, will be offered as bride to King Valerian. The vampire realm will honor our borders, and the human kingdom of Westerfell will survive another century." He spoke with the cold calculation of a man who had spent decades playing the game of political survival. Seated at the long oak table, Lord Magistrate Cordell nodded solemnly. "A wise decision, Your Grace. The vampire hordes grow more restless by the season. The reports from our eastern villages are troubling." The Duke's sister, Lady Imogen, who had remained silent throughout the council meeting, finally spoke. Her voice was barely above a whisper, yet it commanded attention. "And what of Ilara's wishes? She is my daughter, Alaric, not some pawn to be sacrificed." Duke Alaric turned to face his sister, his expression hardening. "We are all pawns, Imogen. Even I. The difference is that some of us understand the game." He set down his wineglass with deliberate precision. "Ilara's sacrifice will save thousands. The Vampire King has agreed to our terms. Blood tribute will cease. Our people will be protected." "Protected?" Lady Imogen echoed hollowly. "Under the rule of monsters." "Better to be ruled by monsters than devoured by them," Alaric countered. "The messenger leaves for Castle Nightshade at dawn. Ilara will be prepared for the journey within a fortnight." As the council meeting dispersed, none noticed the slender figure concealed behind the tapestry depicting the ancient battle between the first Duke of Westerfell and the vampire horde. Lady Ilara Blackthorn, with her mother's raven hair and her late father's emerald eyes, had heard every word. Her heart thundered in her chest, but her face remained composed, a skill she had mastered through years of court life. She waited until the hall emptied before emerging from her hiding place, moving silently through the corridors of the only home she had ever known. The castle had always felt like a prison, but now the stone walls seemed to close in around her, suffocating with their finality. In her chambers, Ilara found her lady's maid, Mira, arranging fresh linens. "My lady," Mira curtsied, then paused at the sight of Ilara's expression. "What troubles you?" "It seems I am to be married," Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the storm raging within. She moved to the window, pushing open the heavy velvet curtains to gaze at the moonlit mountains that separated the human realm from the vampire territories. "To King Valerian." Mira dropped the linens, her face draining of color. "The Vampire King? But my lady, it is my uncle's decree. A political alliance to ensure peace." Ilara's fingers traced the frost patterns forming on the window pane. "I am to leave in a fortnight, to Castle Nightshade, but none who enter that accursed place ever return." Mira's voice trembled with fear. Ilara turned, a strange calm settling over her. "Then I shall be the first." That night, as the castle slept, Ilara slipped from her chambers dressed in a simple riding habit. She made her way to the library, not the public one where courtiers browsed poetry and historical accounts, but the hidden archive, accessible only to the Blackthorn bloodline. Behind a false bookcase, revealed by pressing a specific sequence of carved roses, lay the true history of Westerfell and its uneasy relationship with the Immortals. By the light of a single candle, Ilara pored over ancient texts, searching for any information about the Vampire King she was destined to marry. The accounts were fragmented and often contradictory. Some described Valerian as a merciless tyrant who bathed in the blood of virgins. Others portrayed him as a reluctant ruler who maintained an uneasy peace between humans and vampires. One particularly old manuscript, its pages brittle with age, caught her attention. "King Valerian of House Nightshade," she read aloud, her whisper barely disturbing the dust, "ascended to the obsidian throne 5 centuries past, following the Great Purge. Unlike his predecessors, he sought coexistence rather than conquest. It is said his heart remains unchanged since his mortal days, a rarity among the blood drinkers, who typically lose all human sentiment within decades of their turning." Ilara paused, considering this. A vampire with a heart. It seemed a contradiction in terms. She read on, learning of diplomatic visits Valerian had made to human courts centuries ago, before relations deteriorated. Another text caught her eye, a personal account written by a noblewoman who had met the vampire king during one such visit. "His eyes held the sorrow of millennia," the account read. "Yet when he spoke of art and music, a light kindled within them that belied his fearsome reputation. I found myself forgetting the monster and seeing only the man." As dawn approached, Ilara had formed a picture of her future husband that was complex and contradictory. He was ancient, powerful, feared, yet perhaps not the monster of childhood nightmares. If the accounts were to be believed, there might be something human left in him after all. She replaced the books carefully and returned to her chambers just as the first rays of sunlight crept over the mountains. Sleep eluded her, however, as she contemplated the fate that awaited her. Marriage to an immortal being, life in a court of darkness, forever severed from the world she knew. Yet what alternative did she have? The answer came 3 days later in the form of a letter delivered by a raven with eyes the color of blood. Ilara was in the garden, sketching the withering autumn blooms, when the bird landed on her easel. It regarded her with unsettling intelligence before dropping a small scroll sealed with black wax, bearing the imprint of a rose entangled with thorns. With trembling fingers, Ilara broke the seal. "Lady Ilara Blackthorn, word has reached me of your uncle's proposition. While diplomatic relations between our realms are indeed in need of repair, I find the notion of an arranged marriage rather archaic. I would prefer to meet the woman being offered as my bride before any arrangements are finalized. I extend an invitation for you to visit Castle Nightshade as my honored guest. Should you accept, my emissary will arrive at the eastern gate of Westerfell in 3 days' time at midnight. He will escort you safely through the borderlands. This invitation is extended to you alone. Your acceptance or refusal will not impact the treaty discussions between our realms. With respect, Valerian Nightshade, King of the Eternal Court." Ilara read the letter twice, then a third time. The Vampire King wished to meet her, not as a political pawn, but as a person with agency. It was more courtesy than her own uncle had shown. That evening, during the formal dinner in the Great Hall, Duke Alaric made the announcement of Ilara's betrothal. The court responded with a mixture of horror and fascination. Young noblemen who had once sought her favor now regarded her with a combination of pity and revulsion. Ladies who had called themselves her friends whispered behind jeweled hands. "A toast," declared the Duke, raising his goblet, "to Lady Ilara, whose noble sacrifice ensures the safety of our realm. May her union with King Valerian usher in a new era of peace between our peoples." The court echoed the toast with muted enthusiasm. Ilara raised her own glass mechanically, her mind already made up. She would accept Valerian's invitation. Not because she harbored any romantic notions about the Vampire King, but because for the first time in her life, someone had offered her a choice. That night, she penned a reply. "King Valerian, I accept your invitation. I will meet your emissary at the appointed time and place. Lady Ilara Blackthorn." She attached the note to the leg of the raven, which had remained perched on her balcony, as if expecting her response. The bird took flight, disappearing into the night sky. For the next 3 days, Ilara went through the motions of court life. She smiled at the right moments, spoke the expected pleasantries, and allowed the royal seamstress to begin preparations for a wedding trousseau. But, in secret, she prepared for her clandestine journey. She packed a small satchel with practical garments, a dagger given to her by her father before his death, and a locket containing miniature portraits of her parents. On the third night, as the castle clock struck 11, Ilara donned a dark cloak and slipped through the servants' passages. The guards were easy to avoid. She had spent a lifetime learning the rhythms of castle security. Within minutes, she was in the stable, saddling her mare, Shadow Mist. The journey to the eastern gate was perilous. The road wound through dense forest, where bandits were known to prey on travelers. But Ilara had grown up exploring these woods and knew hidden paths that few others remembered. She rode swiftly, the moon lighting her way through the trees. As midnight approached, she arrived at the crumbling eastern gatehouse, a relic from the days when the border between human and vampire territories had been more formally maintained. Now it stood abandoned, a silent sentinel marking the divide between realms. Ilara dismounted, her breath forming clouds in the cold air. The forest was unnaturally quiet, as if the very creatures of the night feared what was coming. She waited, one hand on the hilt of her concealed dagger. The clock in the distant village struck midnight. As the final toll faded, a figure emerged from the shadows on the other side of the gate. He was tall and lithe, dressed in elegant black attire that seemed to absorb the moonlight. His face was partially obscured by the high collar of his cloak, but Ilara could make out sharp cheekbones and pale skin. "Lady Ilara Blackthorn?" His voice was melodious, with an accent she couldn't place. "Yes," she answered, standing her ground. "Are you the king's emissary?" The figure stepped closer, and Ilara saw his face clearly for the first time. He was handsome in an unsettling way, with features too perfect to be human. His eyes were a startling shade of violet. "Sebastian Thorn, at your service." He offered a formal bow. "First counselor to King Valerian." "You're a vampire," Ilara stated, trying to keep her voice steady. Sebastian's lips curved in amusement. "Your powers of observation are remarkable, my lady." Ilara's cheeks flushed with irritation. "I meant no offense. I've never met one of your kind before. And yet you agreed to marry our king." Sebastian studied her with curious eyes. "Brave or desperate, I wonder?" "Neither," Ilara replied. "Pragmatic." This seemed to please him. "The king will appreciate that quality. Shall we depart? The borderlands are not safe, even for those under royal protection." Ilara hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Lead on, Lord Thorn." Sebastian mounted a midnight black stallion that materialized from the shadows. "Stay close, my lady. The path to Castle Nightshade is treacherous for those unfamiliar with its ways." They rode in silence for a time, crossing from the dense forest of Westerfell into a landscape that seemed to exist in perpetual twilight. The trees here were ancient and twisted, their branches reaching up like supplicating hands. Mist clung to the ground, swirling around the horses' hooves. "Your decision to accept the king's invitation was unexpected," Sebastian said at length. "Most humans fear to tread in our realm." "I am to be offered as a bride to your king regardless," Ilara replied. "I preferred to meet him on terms that at least gave the illusion of choice." Sebastian glanced at her, a flicker of respect in his inhuman eyes. "An uncommon perspective. Most nobles in your position would be sending prayers to their gods. Perhaps I've had enough of others deciding my fate." The words escaped before she could reconsider them. "Ah." Sebastian's expression softened marginally. "Then you and the king may have more in common than you realize, Lady Ilara." Before she could ask what he meant, a howl pierced the night, a sound too guttural and menacing to belong to any natural wolf. "Shadow wolves!" Sebastian's voice was tense. "They hunt these borderlands. We must ride faster." They urged their horses forward, racing through the mist-laden landscape. The howls multiplied, coming from all directions. Ilara caught glimpses of massive shapes loping through the trees, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural blue light. "They're surrounding us," she called to Sebastian, her heart pounding. "Yes," he replied grimly, "and they shouldn't be. These creatures are bound by ancient pacts not to hunt those under royal protection. He drew a silver sword that glowed with faint runes. "Stay behind me, my lady." The first beast lunged from the shadows, a creature with the form of a wolf but twice the size, its fur black as pitch except for streaks of silver along its spine. Sebastian met it with supernatural speed, his blade slicing through the air. The wolf howled in pain as the sword bit into its flank, but more were emerging from the mist. Ilara drew her dagger, knowing it would provide little defense against such creatures. As one of the shadow wolves circled toward her, she braced herself for the attack, but before it could lunge, an arrow whistled through the air, striking the beast in the eye. It collapsed, dissolving into wispy shadows. More arrows followed, each finding their mark with uncanny precision. From the trees emerged a figure on horseback, bow in hand. Even in the dim light, Ilara could tell this was no ordinary archer. He moved with fluid grace, each shot perfectly placed despite the chaos of battle. Within moments, the remaining shadow wolves retreated, melting back into the darkness. Sebastian turned to the newcomer, his expression a mixture of relief and wariness. "Your timing is impeccable, as always," he said. The archer dismounted, and Ilara's breath caught in her throat. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with raven-black hair that fell to his shoulders. His features were aristocratic, high cheekbones, a strong jaw, and lips that seemed permanently set in a contemplative expression. But it was his eyes that held her captive, the color of molten silver, ancient and knowing. He approached Ilara's horse, looking up at her with an intensity that made her heart skip. When he spoke, his voice was deep and resonant, carrying the weight of centuries. "Lady Ilara Blackthorn," he said, not a question, but a statement of recognition. "Welcome to my realm. I am Valerian Nightshade." The Vampire King himself had come to meet her. As their eyes locked, Ilara felt a strange sensation, like standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that the next step would change everything. In that moment, she realized that whatever game of politics her uncle thought he was playing, there were forces at work far beyond his comprehension, and she had just ridden willingly into their midst. The silver-eyed gaze of King Valerian held Ilara captive for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. There was something hypnotic in those eyes, not the supernatural compulsion she had read about in her uncle's forbidden texts, but something far more dangerous, intelligence, curiosity, and a depth of feeling she hadn't expected from an immortal being. "You came alone," he observed, his voice carrying notes of both approval and concern. Ilara straightened her posture in the saddle. "Your invitation specified as much, Your Majesty." A ghost of a smile touched Valerian's lips. "So it did, though I confess I expected your uncle to ignore my wishes and send guards." "What my uncle doesn't know cannot displease him," Ilara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. Valerian's eyebrows rose slightly. "You departed in secret, then? Interesting." He glanced at Sebastian, who was cleaning his silver blade. "The Shadow Wolves shouldn't have attacked someone under my protection. This requires investigation." Sebastian nodded grimly. The border wards were intact. This was deliberate. "Someone testing boundaries," Valerian murmured, his gaze sweeping the now quiet forest. "Or sending a message." He turned back to Ilara. "We should continue to Castle Nightshade without delay. The borderlands grow more dangerous with each passing hour." As they rode, the landscape transformed gradually around them. The twisted trees gave way to elegant cypress and black pines that stood like sentinels against the night sky. The mist thinned, revealing a winding road paved with obsidian stone that glittered under the moonlight. "Your lands are unexpected," Ilara ventured, breaking the silence. Valerian rode beside her now, his presence both commanding and strangely comforting. "What did you expect, Lady Ilara? Barren wastelands? Fields of bones?" Heat rose to her cheeks. "The accounts in Westerfell are not particularly flattering." "No, I imagine not." His tone held no bitterness, only resignation. "History is written by those who fear what they don't understand." They crested a hill, and Ilara gasped involuntarily. Below them stretched a valley bathed in ethereal blue light. At its center stood Castle Nightshade, not the grotesque Gothic monstrosity depicted in human tales, but an architectural marvel of soaring spires and graceful arches. The castle seemed to have been carved from a single piece of obsidian, its surfaces reflecting the starlight like a dark mirror. Surrounding it was a city, its streets laid out in concentric circles, glowing with thousands of lanterns. "Nighthaven," Valerian said softly, noting her amazement. "The eternal city. It's beautiful," Ilara whispered before she could stop herself. Valerian's expression softened momentarily. "Beauty can exist in darkness, my lady. One merely needs eyes willing to see it." They descended into the valley, passing through regions of cultivated land where strange luminescent plants grew in orderly rows. Workers tended the fields, and Ilara realized with a start that many of them were human. "Your people keep humans as slaves?" she asked, unable to hide her disapproval. Sebastian made a sound between a snort and a laugh, but Valerian's response was measured. "They are citizens of the realm who have chosen to live under vampire protection. They work the night hours and are well compensated." His voice took on an edge of challenge. "Does your uncle not have serfs who work his lands for a fraction of what they produce?" Ilara had no ready response to this uncomfortable truth. As they approached the city gates, figures materialized from the shadows, vampire guards in elegant armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. They bowed deeply to Valerian. "Your Majesty," the captain addressed him, "we received no word of your departure. The court grows restless." "The court is always restless, Lucien," Valerian replied dismissively. "Announce that I have returned with our honored guest, Lady Ilara Blackthorn of Westerfell. She's to be accorded every courtesy." The captain's eyes, a startling amber, flicked to Ilara with undisguised curiosity. "The human bride." "Of course, Your Majesty." As they passed through the gates, Ilara felt countless eyes upon her. Vampires lined the streets, elegant and still as statues, watching her procession with expressions ranging from curiosity to disdain to hunger. Humans were present too, moving among the immortals with surprising confidence, though they gave Ilara sidelong glances of pity. Castle Nightshade loomed ever closer, and Ilara felt a growing sense of trepidation. She was now deep within vampire territory, far from anything familiar. The reality of her situation, that she had willingly ridden into the heart of what her people considered the enemy's domain, struck her with full force. "Second thoughts, Lady Ilara?" Sebastian had maneuvered his horse alongside hers, his violet eyes studying her reaction. "Merely processing," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I've never left Westerfell before today. And your first journey is to the realm of nightmares," Sebastian observed with a hint of amusement. "You truly are extraordinary." Before she could respond, they passed through the castle's outer gates. The courtyard within was a marvel of dark splendor. Fountains flowed with water that sparkled like liquid diamonds, and gardens bloomed with night-flowering plants that filled the air with an intoxicating fragrance. Servants, both vampire and human, rushed forward to take their horses. Ilara dismounted, grateful to stretch her legs after the long ride. Valerian appeared at her side, offering his arm with formal courtesy. "Welcome to Castle Nightshade, Lady Ilara. Allow me to escort you to your chambers. You must be weary after your journey." His proximity sent an inexplicable shiver through her. But Ilara placed her hand on his offered arm. His skin was cool to the touch, but not as cold as the stories had led her to believe. As they ascended the castle steps, Ilara felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon her. The entrance hall was cavernous, its ceiling lost in shadows from which crystalline chandeliers hung like captured stars, tapestries depicting ancient battles and strange mystical landscapes adorned walls of polished obsidian. "Your home is magnificent," she said, finding her voice at last. "It has been my prison for 500 years, Valerian replied quietly, But I thank you for the compliment." They proceeded through corridors lined with artwork spanning centuries. Some pieces Ilara recognized as masterworks long thought lost to humanity. Vampire courtiers bowed as they passed, their eyes following Ilara with predatory interest that made her skin prickle. Finally, they arrived at a set of double doors carved with an intricate pattern of thorned roses. Valerian pushed them open to reveal a suite of rooms that took Ilara's breath away. The chamber was spacious and elegant, furnished with pieces that would have been the envy of any human palace. A four-poster bed draped in midnight blue silk dominated one wall, while a sitting area arranged before a fireplace occupied another. Large windows overlooked the city below, and a balcony beyond promised breathtaking views. "These will be your quarters during your stay," Valerian said, remaining at the threshold as Ilara stepped inside. "I've arranged for handmaidens to attend you. Humans from Westerfell who have lived in our court for some time. They should arrive shortly." Ilara turned to face him, suddenly aware of how alone they were. "Your Majesty, I must ask, why did you invite me here? The marriage arrangement was already being negotiated. What purpose does this audition serve?" Valerian's expression remained unreadable, but something flickered in those silver eyes. "I have lived too long and seen too much to accept a political arrangement without meeting the woman in question, especially when that arrangement would bind her to me for eternity." "Eternity?" Ilara's voice faltered. "I had not considered that becoming my queen would require your transformation." Valerian's lips curved in a humorless smile. "Your uncle conveniently omitted that detail, I see." The implications washed over Ilara like ice water, becoming a vampire, immortality, bloodthirst, leaving behind her humanity entirely. "I would never force such a fate upon an unwilling bride," Valerian continued, his voice softening, "which is why I wished to meet you, to give you the choice your uncle denied you." Before Ilara could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. The door opened to reveal two young women, dressed in the simple but elegant attire of high-ranking servants. "Ah, perfect timing," Valerian stepped back. "Lady Ilara, may I present Lyra and Iris, who will serve as your handmaidens during your stay. They are both originally from Westerfell and have served in my court for 3 years." The women curtsied deeply. They appeared healthy and well cared for, contrary to what Ilara might have expected of humans serving vampires. "I'll leave you to rest," Valerian said. "Tomorrow night we shall speak further. A formal dinner will be held in your honor." "Tomorrow night?" Ilara echoed. Valerian's lips quirked in the first genuine smile she had seen from him. "We keep nocturnal hours here, Lady Ilara, but your chambers have been designed to block the sunlight should you wish to maintain human patterns during your stay." With that, he bowed and departed, leaving Ilara alone with her new handmaidens. As soon as the door closed behind him, Ilara felt her legs weaken. The events of the day, her escape from Westerfell, the attack in the borderlands, the arrival at this impossible city, came crashing down upon her. She sank onto a nearby settee, trembling slightly. Lyra, the taller of the two handmaidens, approached with concern. "My lady, are you unwell?" "Just overwhelmed," Ilara admitted. Iris brought a goblet of water. "It's a lot to take in. We remember our first days here." Ilara accepted the water gratefully. "How did you come to serve in a vampire court? Were you taken?" The handmaidens exchanged glances. "No, my lady," Lyra replied. "We came willingly. Life in Westerfell was difficult for us. We were orphaned during the border skirmishes 5 years ago," Iris explained. "When King Valerian offered sanctuary to displaced villagers, we accepted. And you've been treated well?" Ilara couldn't hide her skepticism. "Better than we were in Westerfell," Lyra said simply. "Here, we are valued for our skills, not pitied for our circumstances." As they helped her prepare for bed, Ilara's mind raced with questions. Nothing about this place matched the terrifying stories she had grown up with. The vampires were not mindless monsters, but sophisticated beings with a complex society. Their city rivaled any human capital in beauty and order. And their king, Valerian, was an enigma. He possessed the otherworldly beauty and commanding presence one might expect of an immortal ruler. But there was something profoundly melancholic about him. His comment about the castle being his prison had struck a chord with Ilara. Perhaps they were indeed kindred spirits, both trapped by the expectations of their respective societies. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by dreams of silver eyes and shadow wolves. Ilara woke to find sunlight filtering through heavy drapes, subdued but unmistakable. A breakfast tray awaited her, laden with fresh fruits, warm bread and honey. "Good morning, my lady," Iris greeted her, drawing back the curtains to reveal a stunning view of the vampire city in daylight. Contrary to myth, the sun shone here, though the city maintained an ethereal quality even in its glow. "Did you sleep well?" "As well as could be expected," Ilara replied honestly. After breakfast, she explored her chambers, discovering a well-stocked library adjoining the bedroom. The selection was eclectic. Histories of both human and vampire realms, poetry from cultures long forgotten, scientific treatises that would be considered heretical in Westerfell. A note in elegant handwriting sat atop a leather-bound volume. "I thought you might appreciate some reading material. Knowledge has always been my preferred defense against uncertainty. V." The gesture was unexpectedly thoughtful. Ilara selected the book, A History of the Vampire Courts, and settled in to read. The day passed quickly as she absorbed information that would have been impossible to access in Westerfell. The account was frank about vampire nature, but presented a far more nuanced picture than human histories. Vampires were predators, yes, but also artists, philosophers, and guardians of knowledge that might otherwise have been lost to time. As twilight approached, Lyra and Iris returned to help her prepare for the formal dinner. They brought with them a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered with subtle silver embroidery. "A gift from His Majesty," Lyra explained. "Commissioned specially for your visit." The gown fit perfectly, its design both flattering and modest. As Iris arranged her hair in an elegant style, adorned with silver pins shaped like stars, Ilara studied her reflection in the mirror. She looked different somehow, still herself, but as if some hidden facet of her personality had been drawn to the surface. "You look beautiful, my lady," Iris said softly. "The court will be enchanted." "Is that a concern?" Ilara asked. "Being enchanting to vampires?" The handmaidens exchanged another glance. "The court is complex," Lyra admitted. "Not all approve of His Majesty's interest in forging peace with humans. Some see it as weakness." "And what of the king himself?" Ilara couldn't help asking. "What manner of ruler is he?" "Fair but ruthless when necessary," Iris replied. "He protects those under his care, but woe to those who betray his trust." "He is ancient, even among the immortals," Lyra added. "Few remember his mortal days. It's said he was a warrior king who chose transformation to continue protecting his people from a greater threat." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Sebastian Thorne entered, resplendent in formal attire that emphasized his otherworldly elegance. "Lady Ilara," he bowed, "I've been sent to escort you to dinner. The court awaits." The great hall of Castle Nightshade was a cathedral of shadows and light. Hundreds of candles illuminated the space, their flames reflecting off obsidian walls and crystal chandeliers. Long tables arranged in a horseshoe formation seated at least 100 vampires, all dressed in finery that spanned centuries of fashion. At the head table, positioned on a dais, sat King Valerian on a throne, carved from what appeared to be a single massive piece of onyx. As Sebastian led Ilara into the hall, a hush fell over the assembled court. All eyes turned to assess the human guest, some with curiosity, others with undisguised hostility. Ilara felt naked under their scrutiny, but forced herself to walk with dignity, chin high and shoulders back as her mother had taught her. Valerian rose as she approached. Tonight he wore formal attire of black and silver that complemented her own gown, as if they had coordinated their appearances. The coincidence, or deliberate choice, was not lost on the court, who murmured among themselves. "Lady Ilara," Valerian's voice carried throughout the hall, "you honor us with your presence." He extended his hand, guiding her to the seat at his right, a position of highest honor. As Ilara took her place, she became aware of the woman seated at Valerian's left. She was stunningly beautiful, with white blonde hair and eyes the color of amethysts. Her expression was one of barely concealed displeasure. "May I present Lady Seraphina Morgrave," Valerian said, his tone carefully neutral. "First Lady of the Eternal Court and member of my High Council." "Charmed." Seraphina's voice was melodious, but cold as winter. "How novel to have a human dining among us rather than providing the meal." A tense silence followed her words. Ilara saw Sebastian stiffen, and several other courtiers looked uncomfortable. "Lady Seraphina has a unique sense of humor," Valerian said smoothly. "You'll grow accustomed to it, as we all have over the centuries." Ilara met Seraphina's gaze directly. "I look forward to becoming better acquainted with all the court's peculiarities." A soft ripple of surprise passed through the gathered vampires. Seraphina's perfect features hardened momentarily before she composed herself. "Spirited," she remarked to Valerian, "though one wonders if spirit alone will be enough for what you intend." Before Valerian could respond, servants appeared bearing goblets of dark liquid. Ilara tensed, realizing what it must be. "Blood wine," Sebastian murmured beside her. "Don't worry, yours is actual wine." Indeed, the goblet placed before Ilara contained rich red wine, not the thicker substance served to the vampires. The meal that followed was equally accommodating. The vampires consumed small amounts of rare meat, seeming to savor the experience of eating even though Ilara suspected they derived no nourishment from it. Her own plate contained delicacies that would rival any feast in Westerfell. Throughout the dinner, Valerian engaged her in conversation, asking thoughtful questions about her life in Westerfell, her interests, and her thoughts on governance. Ilara found herself responding with increasing candor, drawn in by his genuine interest and surprising knowledge of human affairs. "You speak as if you visited Westerfell recently," she observed, after he made a comment about the architectural renovations to the cathedral in the capital. "I make it a point to understand the human realms," Valerian replied. "Knowledge is often the difference between war and peace." "And which do you prefer, Your Majesty?" Ilara asked boldly. The table fell silent, all eyes on them. "Peace," Valerian answered without hesitation, "but not at any cost. There are principles worth fighting for, on both sides of our divide." The conversation resumed around them, but Ilara noticed Seraphina watching their exchange with calculating eyes. There was history there, centuries of it perhaps, and suddenly Ilara felt like a child wading into the depths of an ocean she couldn't begin to comprehend. As the dinner progressed, other members of the court approached to introduce themselves. Lord Cassius, the ancient keeper of vampire lore, whose papery skin and milky eyes belied a sharp mind. Lady Isolde, mistress of the night gardens, who spoke of plants with passionate intensity. Young Lord Darius, who had been turned barely a century ago and retained much of his human enthusiasm. The diversity among them fascinated Ilara. They were not the uniform monsters of human tales, but individuals with distinct personalities and interests, bound together by their immortal condition. As the formal dinner concluded, musicians appeared, filling the hall with hauntingly beautiful melodies. Couples began to dance, a spectacle of inhuman grace as vampires moved with perfect coordination. "Would you care to dance, Lady Ilara?" Valerian's question surprised her. "I'm afraid vampire dances may differ from those I know," she admitted. "The steps are ancient but simple," he assured her. "I will guide you." Before she could respond, a commotion at the entrance to the great hall interrupted the festivities. A vampire guard stumbled in, his armor torn and bloody. Behind him came others, carrying a stretcher upon which lay a grievously wounded vampire. "Your Majesty," the guard called, his voice strained. "We were attacked at the western outpost, humans bearing silver weapons and blessed fire." Valerian was on his feet instantly. All traces of the courtly host vanished. "Lord Cassius, clear the hall. Lady Seraphina, summon the war council. Sebastian, with me." As the court erupted into controlled chaos, Valerian turned to Ilara, his silver eyes now hard as steel. "It seems your uncle's pledge of peace was premature, or entirely false. Human forces are attacking my borders even as we speak." "That's impossible," Ilara protested. "My uncle would never—" "The attackers bore the blackthorn insignia of Westerfell," the wounded guard rasped. "They killed 7 of our patrol. They said they've come for the Duke's niece." All eyes turned to Ilara, suspicion replacing the earlier curiosity. "I knew nothing of this," she insisted, her heart racing. "I swear it." Valerian studied her face intently, searching for any sign of deception. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him, for he nodded slightly. "I believe you," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "But others will not be so easily convinced." He straightened, addressing Sebastian. "Escort Lady Ilara to her chambers and post guards. Ensure her safety from all threats." The implication was clear. Some in the vampire court might now see her as an enemy to be eliminated. As Sebastian led her from the hall, Ilara caught sight of Seraphina's triumphant smile. The First Lady leaned close to whisper something to another council member, her eyes never leaving Ilara. "What happens now?" Ilara asked Sebastian as they hurried through the corridors. "Now," Sebastian replied grimly, "we discover whether your arrival was meant to herald peace or serve as the opening move in a new war." In her chambers, with the doors locked and vampire guards posted outside, Ilara paced restlessly. The accusations made no sense. Why would her uncle send forces to attack vampire territories when he had just arranged her betrothal to their king? Unless a terrible suspicion formed in her mind. What if her uncle had never intended the marriage alliance to succeed? What if she was merely bait, luring the vampire king into a false sense of security while Westerfell prepared for war? A soft tap at her balcony doors startled her from these dark thoughts. Cautiously she approached, half expecting to find another assassin or messenger from her uncle. Instead, she found a raven perched on the balustrade, a small scroll attached to its leg. With trembling fingers, Ilara retrieved the message and unrolled it. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "Not all is as it seems. The attack was staged. There are those on both sides who desire war. Trust no one, not your uncle's men, not the vampire court, and especially not those closest to the king. If you wish to learn the truth, meet me in the Hall of Echoes at midnight. Come alone." The note was unsigned. Ilara read it twice, then cast it into the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed the mysterious warning. Someone was playing a dangerous game, and she had become a central piece on the board. But who was manipulating events? And to what end? As the clock inched toward midnight, Ilara made her decision. She would go to the Hall of Echoes, wherever that might be, and confront this mysterious informant. The truth was worth the risk. Donning a dark cloak over her gown, she moved to the balcony and looked down at the castle grounds below. The vampire guards would be at her door, but perhaps there was another way out. It was time to discover what game was truly being played, and who was sacrificing whom in this deadly match between realms. Ilara studied the castle grounds below her balcony, calculating the distance to the ground. Too far for a safe descent, even if she tore the bedsheets into makeshift rope. Her gaze swept the surrounding architecture, noting decorative ledges and ornate stonework that might serve as handholds, but the risk remained formidable. Just as she was about to abandon the idea, a shadow moved along the castle wall, flowing like liquid darkness before materializing on her balcony. "Going somewhere, my lady?" Sebastian's voice was soft, his violet eyes gleaming with amusement. Ilara stepped back, hand instinctively reaching for a weapon she didn't possess. "I was merely getting fresh air, with a cloak and soft-soled shoes." Sebastian arched an eyebrow. "You'll need to lie more convincingly if you're to survive vampire court." "I am not lying," Ilara said, straightening her posture. "I was merely contemplating. Contemplating escape? Or something more dangerous?" Sebastian moved closer, his movements fluid as water. "Perhaps a clandestine meeting in the Hall of Echoes." Ilara's breath caught. "You know about that?" "I know most things that happen within these walls," he replied, producing a crumpled piece of parchment, identical to the one she had burned. "The same message was sent to several humans in the castle. A trap, obviously. Or a genuine warning," Ilara countered. Sebastian studied her for a long moment. "You truly wish to go? Despite the obvious danger?" "I need answers. About the attack. About my uncle's true intentions. About Valerian." Something shifted in Sebastian's expression. A softening or perhaps recognition. "Then I will take you. Not because I believe this mysterious messenger, but because I admire your courage, and because Valerian would want you to have the truth, even if he cannot give it to you himself." Before Ilara could question this cryptic statement, Sebastian opened the balcony doors. The Hall of Echoes lies beneath the castle, accessible only through the old crypts. "We must move swiftly and silently." He led her through a dizzying sequence of corridors, hidden passageways, and narrow staircases that spiraled deep into the castle's foundations. The air grew cooler and damp, carrying the scent of ancient stone and something older, a primordial darkness that had dwelled in these depths long before the castle was built. They passed through a crypt where vampire nobles of centuries past lay in ornate sarcophagi. Unlike human burials, these chambers showed signs of regular visitation. Fresh flowers, burning candles, open books left as if the dead might rise to continue reading. "Do they return?" Ilara whispered, gesturing to the elaborate resting places. "Not in the way you fear," Sebastian replied. "When a vampire truly dies, they are gone. But we honor our dead differently. We believe their essence lingers in places they loved. The crypts are not for containing death, but for communing with memory." Beyond the crypts, they came to an ancient doorway carved with spiraling patterns that seemed to move in the torchlight. Sebastian pressed his palm against the center, whispering words in a language Ilara didn't recognize. The door swung inward silently. "The Hall of Echoes," Sebastian announced, gesturing for her to enter. "Be cautious. The hall has a will of its own." Ilara stepped inside and gasped. The chamber was vast and circular, its ceiling lost in darkness. The walls were polished obsidian, so perfectly reflective that the hall seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. In the center stood a pool of water so still it appeared solid. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice creating ripples in the air that visibly distorted the reflective surfaces. "The oldest part of Castle Nightshade," Sebastian explained, his own voice creating different patterns. "Built over an ancient wellspring of power that predates even vampire memory. It shows echoes of the past and glimpses of possible futures to those who know how to look." "How fitting for our meeting," came a new voice, feminine and familiar. From the shadows emerged Seraphina, resplendent in deep purple robes that seemed to absorb the scant light. Her amethyst eyes fixed on Ilara with predatory focus. "Lady Seraphina," Ilara said, instinctively moving closer to Sebastian. "You sent the message?" "Clever girl," Seraphina smiled, revealing the tips of her fangs. "I knew you'd come, despite the obvious risk. Humans are so predictably curious." Sebastian moved slightly in front of Ilara. "What game are you playing, Seraphina?" "No game, old friend, merely expediting inevitable conclusions." She circled the pool, trailing her fingers just above its surface. "Tell me, Lady Ilara, what do you know of vampire politics?" "Only what I've gleaned from observation," Ilara replied cautiously. "Then you've observed that Valerian's peace initiative is not universally popular," Seraphina continued. Many believe humans should remain what nature intended them to be, prey, not partners. And you share this view? Ilara asked, though she already knew the answer. Serafina's laughter echoed throughout the hall, multiplying until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I have lived 7 centuries watching humans wage war upon each other with increasing efficiency. Your kind perfects killing far better than we ever could. Yet Valerian believes you capable of coexistence. The attack on the outpost, Sebastian interjected. You orchestrated it. I merely provided incentive to certain discontented elements in Westerfell, Serafina corrected. A small cadre of nobles who share Duke Alaric's secret ambition, the complete eradication of vampires from the continent. Ilara shook her head. That's not possible. My uncle proposed the marriage alliance. A ruse. Serafina cut her off. Your uncle has been building an army, stockpiling silver weapons and blessed fire for years. The marriage proposal was meant to lower Valerian's guard while these preparations continued. And how would you know this? Sebastian demanded. Because I have been in communication with Duke Alaric for over a year. Serafina's smile turned cruel. We share a common goal, war, though for very different reasons. The revelation struck Ilara like a physical blow. My uncle conspired with you against Valerian. Why? Power, of course. Serafina began tracing patterns above the pool, causing the water to stir. Alaric desires to be the hero who eliminates the vampire threat once and for all. I desire to replace a king grown too soft, too sentimental about human life. Images began to form in the pool. Duke Alaric in his war chamber, surrounded by maps and weapons. Serafina passing scrolls to cloaked figures at the border. The attack on the vampire outpost, clearly coordinated by both human and vampire agents. You both betrayed your rulers, Ilara said, disgust rising within her. We both recognize the inevitable, Serafina corrected. Coexistence is a fantasy. Conflict between our kinds is written in blood and bone. Sebastian's hand moved to his sword. Valerian will have your head for this treachery. Valerian won't live to see the dawn, Serafina replied calmly. Even now, assassins approach his chambers. Humans bearing the Blackthorn seal, ensuring that when his body is discovered, all blame will fall on Westerfell. Horror washed over Ilara. We have to warn him. That would be counterproductive to my plans, Serafina sighed, which is why neither of you will be leaving this hall. With a flick of her wrist, the doorway sealed itself. 4 vampire guards materialized from the shadows, surrounding them. Kill the human, Serafina ordered. Sebastian, restrain him. I still have use for his particular talents. The guards advanced, drawing silver daggers that gleamed with lethal purpose. Sebastian pushed Ilara behind him, drawing his own blade. Run to the pool, he whispered urgently. Touch the water and think of Valerian. The hall responds to pure intention. Before Ilara could question this instruction, the guards attacked. Sebastian moved with blinding speed, meeting the first 2 with a whirlwind of steel. Ilara darted toward the pool, but one of the remaining guards cut off her path, grinning with anticipation. Nothing personal, human, he said, lunging forward. Ilara dodged, years of dance lessons giving her just enough agility to avoid the blade. She caught glimpses of Sebastian fighting. One vampire already lay motionless on the floor, but the others were pressing him hard. Serafina stood back, watching the spectacle with clinical detachment. The guard cornering Ilara was toying with her, making small feints and enjoying her desperate retreats. Your blood smells exquisite, he remarked. Perhaps I'll sample it before you die. In that moment of his sadistic contemplation, Ilara saw her opening. She feigned stumbling backward, and when the guard lunged to catch her, she dropped and rolled past him, scrambling the final distance to the pool. She plunged her hand into the water, focusing her thoughts on Valerian with desperate intensity. The water felt electric against her skin, pulsing with ancient power. The surface rippled violently, then stilled to reveal an image of Valerian in his private chambers, unaware of the shadowy figures scaling the castle wall toward his balcony. "Valerian!" she cried out, unsure if this was merely a vision or some form of communication. To her astonishment, the vampire king turned in the image, as if hearing her voice. "Ilara?" His silver eyes widened with recognition. "Assassins!" she shouted. "Coming for you now! Seraphina has betrayed—" A hand seized her hair, yanking her backward with brutal force. The guard dragged her away from the pool, its surface returning to stillness. "Enough of that!" he growled, raising his dagger. Sebastian was still fighting, but now bleeding from multiple wounds. He dispatched another guard, but staggered under the onslaught of the remaining one. Seraphina watched with growing impatience. "Finish them," she commanded. "We've wasted enough time." The guard holding Ilara positioned his blade at her throat. She closed her eyes, preparing for the bite of steel, but instead felt a rush of wind and heard a gurgling sound. The grip on her hair released. She opened her eyes to see her attacker crumpling to the ground, an ornate arrow protruding from his throat. Two more arrows whistled through the air in quick succession, finding targets in the remaining guard and Seraphina's shoulder. "No!" Seraphina screamed, clutching her wound. The arrow had struck deep and black blood seeped between her fingers. Valerian stood in the doorway, bow in hand, his silver eyes blazing with cold fury. Behind him were several royal guards. "Seize the traitor," he commanded. The guards moved to surround Seraphina, who backed away, hissing with rage. "You're too late, Valerian," she spat. "The wheels are in motion. Duke Alaric marches to the border with an army. My loyalists move throughout the realm. The era of coexistence dies tonight." "Bind her with silver," Valerian ordered, his voice terrifyingly calm. He moved to Sebastian, helping his wounded counselor to his feet. "Your loyalty will be remembered, old friend." "She nearly succeeded," Sebastian groaned, clutching a deep wound in his side. "Nearly," Valerian agreed, before turning his attention to Ilara. His expression softened marginally. "Are you harmed?" Ilara shook her head, though her scalp burned where the guard had gripped her hair. "Your life was in danger. I had to try to warn you." "And you succeeded," he replied. "The Hall of Echoes carried your warning. The assassins were intercepted." Seraphina laughed bitterly as the guards bound her with silver chains that hissed against her skin. "You've won nothing. War comes whether you wish it or not. The humans will never accept peace with our kind." Valerian regarded her with ancient eyes. "Peace is not achieved through acceptance alone, but through understanding. Lady Ilara has shown more courage and honor than you have in 7 centuries of existence." He turned to his guards. "Take Seraphina to the obsidian cells. I will deal with her after more pressing matters are addressed." As Seraphina was dragged away, still hurling threats and promises of vengeance, Valerian approached the pool at the center of the hall. "Show me the borders of Westerfell," he commanded. The water rippled, then revealed a grim scene. Duke Alaric leading a column of soldiers armed with silver weapons and blazing torches. They marched under cover of night, approaching the vampire territories with clear intent. "My uncle truly means to start a war," Ilara whispered, the full weight of the betrayal settling upon her. "He believes he can win," Valerian observed. "Seraphina must have convinced him of vampire vulnerability." "What will you do?" Ilara asked. Valerian's expression was resolute. "What I must to protect my people. War has been thrust upon us." "There must be another way," Ilara insisted. "Let me speak to my uncle. Perhaps I can make him see reason." "He sent you here as a distraction while preparing for invasion," Sebastian pointed out, wincing as a healer tended his wounds. "Your value to him is as a political pawn, nothing more." "Then I will prove my value lies elsewhere," Ilara replied firmly. "I know my uncle's tactics, his strengths and weaknesses. Let me help you prevent this war, not just for vampires, but for the humans who would suffer in the conflict." Valerian studied her with those ancient silver eyes. You would stand against your own blood, your own kind. I stand for peace, Ilara answered, for coexistence. If that places me against my uncle, then so be it. Something shifted in Valerian's expression. Respect, certainly, but something more complex as well. He extended his hand to her, a gesture not of courtly manners, but of alliance. Then we will face this threat together, he said as she placed her hand in his. But know this, if we fail, both our kinds face devastation. Seraphina's conspirators will not rest, and your uncle's ambition will not be easily thwarted. I understand the stakes, Ilara replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. Valerian nodded, then addressed his guards. Prepare the elite guard. We ride to the border before dawn. To Sebastian he added, summon the war council. Lady Ilara will join us. Her knowledge of Westerfel's military strategy may prove invaluable. As they left the Hall of Echoes, Ilara caught Valerian studying her with an unreadable expression. You continue to surprise me, he said quietly. Few would stand against their own family, their own realm. My loyalty is to what's right, she replied, not to blood or borders. A rare perspective, Valerian observed, one I've encountered perhaps 3 times in 5 centuries. They ascended toward the upper levels of the castle, where urgent activity was already underway. Vampires arming themselves, messengers dispatched to outlying territories, defensive positions being coordinated. In the war chamber, maps were spread across a massive obsidian table. Vampire nobles argued strategy, their ancient rivalries temporarily set aside in the face of common threat. The humans will attack at dawn, one general insisted. We should strike first, while night gives us advantage. No, Ilara interjected, approaching the map. All eyes turned to her, some curious, others openly hostile. My uncle never attacks at dawn. He believes it's too obvious. He'll move at midday, when he thinks you'll be at your weakest. Valerian gestured for her to continue. Swallowing her nervousness, Ilara leaned over the map, indicating key positions. He'll split his forces here and here, she explained, pointing to 2 mountain passes. A diversion to draw your main force, while his elite soldiers strike through this valley with blessed fire and silver. The vampire generals exchanged glances, reassessing her with new respect. How can you be certain? Asked an ancient vampire with a scar across his face. Because it's the strategy detailed in his private war journals, Ilara replied. The same strategy he used against the mountain clans 3 years ago. My uncle is brilliant but predictable. He relies on what has worked before. Valerian studied the map, then nodded decisively. We will position our forces accordingly, not to attack, but to defend. I want a show of strength that will force negotiation, not guarantee slaughter. Negotiation, the scarred general scoffed. With humans who come bearing blessed fire? Yes, Valerian's voice was firm, because the alternative is mutual destruction. Neither side can win outright, only ensure the other's devastation alongside their own. As the council continued debating strategy, Ilara noticed Sebastian watching her from across the room. There was something in his expression, a question perhaps, or a warning. He approached slowly, still favoring his wounded side. You've committed yourself to a dangerous path, he said quietly. Standing with vampires against humans will mark you as a traitor to your kind. There will be no going back. I'm not standing with vampires against humans, Ilara corrected. I'm standing with Valerian against my uncle. There's a difference. Sebastian's violet eyes narrowed. Is there? Or is there another reason you align yourself so readily with our king? Before Ilara could respond, the chamber doors burst open. A messenger rushed in, face pale with urgency. Your Majesty, he gasped, dropping to one knee before Valerian. We've intercepted a communication from Duke Alaric to his generals. The human army doesn't march alone. They've allied with the Shadow Court. A hush fell over the room. Ilara saw fear in the eyes of vampires who had seemed fearless moments before. The Shadow Court? She asked, looking to Valerian. What does that mean? Valerian's expression was grim, his silver eyes darkening to the color of storm clouds. "It means your uncle has made a deal with the only beings vampires truly fear. The abandoned ones. Those who were once vampire but have become something else, something far worse." "Is that possible?" Ilara whispered. "It shouldn't be," Sebastian replied, his voice tight with concern. "The Shadow Court has been sealed beyond the veil for 3 centuries. Serafina," Valerian said, his voice cold with realization. "Her obsession with ancient magic. She found a way to breach the veil." He turned to Ilara, and for the first time she saw genuine fear in those ancient eyes. "If the Shadow Court has truly returned and allied with your uncle, then we face not just war but annihilation. They will not distinguish between human and vampire once they've regained their power. They will consume both our worlds." The war chamber erupted into chaos. Voices raised in argument, demands for immediate action, calls for evacuation of the city. Through it all, Valerian remained still, his eyes locked with Ilara's. "There is only one way to prevent this," he said, his voice cutting through the din. "We must reach your uncle before he completes whatever ritual Serafina provided to fully manifest the Shadow Court in our realm." "How?" Ilara asked. "Together," Valerian replied, reaching for her hand. "There is ancient magic in the joining of vampire and human bloodlines, magic that might counteract what Serafina has set in motion." His fingers brushed hers, and Ilara felt a strange resonance, as if something long dormant within her had awakened at his touch. The sensation was both terrifying and exhilarating. "What are you suggesting?" she whispered. "Something not done for a millennium," Valerian answered, his voice so low only she could hear. "A true blood bond. Not the political marriage your uncle proposed, but a joining of essences that could create power enough to challenge even the Shadow Court." Sebastian appeared at Valerian's side, his expression grave. "My king, such a bond with a mortal. You cannot be certain she would survive." "No," Valerian agreed, his eyes never leaving Ilara's. "I cannot." The ancient ritual chamber lay deep beneath Castle Nightshade, far below even the Hall of Echoes. Crystalline formations grew from ceiling and floor, meeting in luminous pillars that cast prismatic light across the obsidian walls. In the center stood a raised dais of white marble, the only such stone in the entire castle, veined with silver that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. Ilara stood at the threshold, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. The journey down had been silent, the gravity of their purpose weighing on both her and Valerian. Now, facing the ancient chamber, her courage wavered. "You can still refuse," Valerian said quietly, his silver eyes reflecting the crystal light. "No one would think less of you." Ilara met his gaze. "And doom both our peoples to destruction? What kind of choice is that?" "The only kind that matters," he replied. "One made with full awareness of the consequences." Sebastian and 2 other vampire elders stood at a respectful distance, witnesses to whatever would unfold. Their expressions ranged from solemn to skeptical. "The blood bond hasn't been attempted in over 1,000 years, one elder, a woman with silver hair and golden eyes, cautioned, "and never with a human who wasn't of magical lineage." "Lady Ilara carries the blackthorn blood," Valerian countered. "That line has always straddled the boundary between mundane and mystical." Ilara stepped onto the dais, feeling the marble warm beneath her feet. "Explain it to me again. What exactly will this blood bond do?" Valerian joined her on the dais, their shadows merging on the obsidian floor. "It will create a bridge between our essences, vampire and human, generating power drawn from the balance between life and death, mortality and immortality. That power, properly directed, might be enough to close the breach Serafina opened for the Shadow Court." "Might be," Sebastian emphasized. "There are no certainties here." "What of the risks to Lady Ilara?" the golden-eyed elder pressed. "Her body could reject the bond. Her mind might fracture under the strain of vampire consciousness. Or I could emerge as something neither fully human nor vampire," Ilara added, having spent the hours since the War Council absorbing every scrap of information about the ritual. Yes, Valerian acknowledged. All these outcomes are possible. Ilara took a steadying breath. And if we do nothing, the Shadow Court breaks through completely. My uncle's army is annihilated, your people are hunted to extinction, and any humans who survive become cattle for beings worse than the darkest vampire myths. That is the most likely outcome, the third elder, a gaunt vampire with eyes like black holes, confirmed. Then we have no choice, Ilara concluded. Valerian studied her face, as if committing every feature to memory. There is always choice, Ilara. That is what separates us from monsters. She placed her hand over his, surprised as always by the warmth of his skin, warmer now than when they first met, as if his prolonged contact with her had kindled something long dormant. I choose this, she said with quiet certainty. I choose to fight for both our worlds. Valerian nodded, a fleeting smile softening his features. Then let us begin. The elders moved forward, arranging themselves around the dais. Sebastian produced an ornate dagger with a blade of obsidian, so dark it seemed to absorb light. The golden-eyed elder carried a crystal vial filled with liquid that glowed with an inner radiance, while the gaunt elder unfolded a parchment covered in script so ancient it predated any language Ilara recognized. The ritual has 3 phases, Valerian explained, taking the dagger from Sebastian. Exchange, binding, and awakening. Each offers a moment to halt the process. Should either of us sense danger, Ilara nodded, steeling herself as Valerian made a precise cut across his palm. His blood welled, darker than human blood, but not the black ichor of Seraphina's wound. It carried an iridescent quality, shimmering in the crystalline light. When he handed her the dagger, their fingers brushed, sending a current of energy between them that made Ilara gasp. With a steady hand, she mirrored his action, drawing the obsidian edge across her palm. The cut stung, but less than expected. The blade was so sharp it parted flesh with minimal resistance. Now, we join, Valerian said softly, extending his bleeding palm. Ilara placed her hand against his, their blood mingling. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming, heat flooding from the point of contact up her arm and throughout her body. Images flashed through her mind. A young warrior king standing against barbarian hordes, the same man, centuries later, watching civilizations rise and fall. Valerian in countless moments of solitude, gazing at sunrises he could barely tolerate for the beauty they represented. His memories, she realized. She was experiencing fragments of his impossibly long life. Valerian's pupils dilated, his breath catching. I see your childhood, he whispered. The first time you defied your uncle. Your mother teaching you to dance. Your father's death. The golden-eyed elder approached, uncorking the crystal vial. The binding agent, she announced, last distilled from the tears of a phoenix during the black moon. Once applied, the exchange becomes irreversible. Ilara met Valerian's gaze, searching for any hesitation. Finding none, she nodded. The elder poured the luminous liquid over their joined hands. It sizzled where it touched their mingled blood, releasing vapor that smelled of cinnamon and lightning. The sensation of connection intensified, no longer just memories but emotions, sensations, the very essence of Valerian's being flowing into Ilara as hers flowed into him. The binding is accepted, the elder announced, stepping back. The gaunt elder began chanting from the ancient parchment, his voice resonating at frequencies that made the crystal pillars vibrate in harmony. The marble beneath their feet grew warmer, the silver veins pulsing faster. The final phase approaches, Sebastian warned. The awakening is the most dangerous moment. Ilara barely heard him. The connection with Valerian had become all-consuming. 5 centuries of existence pouring into her mortal consciousness. She experienced his transformation from human to vampire, the agonizing hunger that followed, the gradual loss of human companions to time while he remained unchanged. She felt his loneliness, his struggle to maintain humanity in a form designed for predation, his centuries-long search for meaning. In return, she knew he was experiencing the intensity of her mortal existence, every emotion heightened by the knowledge of limited time, every joy and sorrow magnified by its impermanence. He was feeling the love she'd known, the fears she'd conquered, the hopes she still harbored. The chanting reached a crescendo. The marble dais began to glow, light traveling up through their bodies. Ilara felt her heartbeat accelerate, then stutter, then sink with a rhythm she didn't recognize, not a heartbeat at all, but the pulse of something older and more fundamental. "Now," Valerian whispered, his voice strained, "we must direct the power toward its purpose. Think of the breach, of the shadow court trying to cross over. Focus your will on closing that pathway." Ilara tried to concentrate, but the influx of vampire consciousness was overwhelming. Her vision blurred, darkness encroaching at the edges. She was drowning in centuries of memory, losing her sense of self in the vastness of Valerian's existence. "Ilara," his voice seemed distant now, "stay with me. Focus on who you are." Who was she? Lady Ilara Blackthorn, the Duke's niece, a political pawn? None of these identities seemed adequate now, with 500 years of another's life flooding her mind. "Ilara," Valerian called again more urgently, "remember why we're doing this. Remember your choice." Choice. The word anchored her. She had chosen this path, not her uncle, not Valerian, not fate. Her choice made with clear understanding of the stakes. That act of will defined her more than any title or bloodline. With tremendous effort, she focused on the breach Serafina had created, visualizing it as a tear in reality near the border between vampire and human lands. She imagined the power building between her and Valerian flowing toward that tear, sealing it closed. The chamber filled with blinding light, the crystal pillars rang like massive bells, a harmonic convergence that vibrated through bone and blood. Ilara felt something fundamental shifting within her, not becoming vampire, but not remaining fully human either. A third state, balanced on the knife's edge between worlds. Through their connection, she sensed Valerian undergoing a parallel transformation. The weight of centuries lightened, the predatory instinct tempered by renewed humanity, ancient weariness giving way to something like hope. With a sound like reality itself tearing, a shockwave emanated from their joined hands. The marble dais cracked beneath them, the obsidian walls developing fissures that leaked golden light. Sebastian and the elders were thrown backward, shielding their eyes from the radiance. Then, as suddenly as it began, the phenomenon ceased. The chamber fell silent, the crystals dimmed to a gentle glow, and the golden light receded into the walls, leaving them whole once more. Ilara collapsed to her knees, Valerian following, their hands still clasped. She felt altered in ways she couldn't articulate, lighter yet stronger, more grounded yet somehow ethereal. Her senses had sharpened dramatically. She could hear heartbeats beyond the chamber, smell the distinct signatures of each person present, see microscopic details in the marble beneath them. "Did it work?" she asked, her voice sounding strange to her enhanced hearing. Valerian looked at her with wonder. His silver eyes now held flecks of emerald, echoes of her own eye color. "Yes," he said softly. "I can feel the breach closing, the shadow court's influence receding." Sebastian approached cautiously. "My king? Lady Ilara? Are you yourselves?" Valerian helped Ilara to her feet, his movements gentle. "We are ourselves and more," he replied. "The bond is complete." The golden-eyed elder studied them with fascination. "Extraordinary. Neither vampire nor human, but a perfect balance. I never thought I'd live to see such a thing." "What happens now?" Ilara asked, still adjusting to her transformed senses. "Now," Valerian said grimly, "we confront your uncle before he realizes his Shadow Court allies have been cut off." Duke Alaric Blackthorn stood at the edge of the encampment, watching as his soldiers made final preparations for the assault on vampire territories. Dawn was still hours away, but already the men moved with purpose, checking silver-edged weapons and vials of blessed fire. Victory was within reach, decades of planning culminating in this moment. "Your Grace!" His captain approached, saluting sharply. "The advanced scouts have returned. The vampire defenses are positioned exactly where you predicted." Alaric allowed himself a thin smile. "Good. They think themselves so clever, but 5 centuries of existence doesn't guarantee strategic innovation." He turned back toward his command tent. "Prepare the elite squadrons. We attack the Western Passage at midday." "And what of Lady Alara?" the captain asked hesitantly. "Should we attempt to extract her before the assault?" Alaric's expression hardened. "My niece has served her purpose as a distraction. If she survives, we'll welcome her back as a hero's kin. If not," he shrugged, "we'll mourn her as a martyr to our cause." The captain bowed and retreated, leaving Alaric alone with his thoughts. He had never intended the marriage alliance to proceed, merely needed time to finalize his preparations and secure the allegiance of the mysterious shadow beings that Seraphina had introduced him to. Beings that promised power beyond mortal comprehension in exchange for vampire extinction. A cold wind suddenly swept through the camp, extinguishing torches and campfires. Soldiers cried out in alarm as darkness enveloped them. Alaric reached for his sword, squinting into the unnatural gloom. "Who goes there?" he demanded. "Show yourself!" The darkness receded, but only in a small circle around Alaric. Beyond that perimeter, he could hear his men calling out in confusion, unable to penetrate the blackness with their torches. 2 figures materialized at the edge of the circle. One he recognized immediately as his niece, Alara. But she was changed somehow, her presence more commanding, her eyes gleaming with an inner light that was neither human nor vampire. Beside her stood King Valerian, similarly transformed, silver eyes now flecked with green. "Uncle!" Ilara's voice carried a resonance it had never possessed before. "This ends now." Alaric's shock gave way to cold calculation. "So, the vampire king has turned you. How disappointing." "Not turned," Valerian corrected. "Bonded. Lady Alara remains herself, as do I, but we now share something greater than either of our original natures." Alaric scoffed. "Pretty words to disguise corruption. What have you done to my men?" "They are unharmed," Alara replied, "merely contained while we speak. This is your only opportunity to withdraw, uncle. The Shadow Court is no longer accessible to you. The breach has been sealed." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Alaric's face. "Impossible. The ritual is already in progress. My allies were using you," Valerian interrupted, "as Seraphina used you. The Shadow Court cares nothing for human ambitions. Once freed, they would have consumed your world alongside ours." "Lies," Alaric hissed, drawing his sword. "Vampire deception." Alara stepped forward, her movement so fluid it seemed she floated rather than walked. "Search your instincts, uncle. You've always prided yourself on recognizing truth from falsehood. Look at what we've become, and tell me if this was part of your calculations." Despite himself, Alaric studied them more closely. The changes were subtle, but undeniable. Both emanated a power he couldn't identify, neither fully vampire nor human, but something his mind struggled to categorize. And there was a connection between them, visible as a faint luminescence that stretched from one to the other, like a living cord. "What are you?" he whispered. "The first of a new possibility," Valerian answered. "Neither predator nor prey, but equals in balance. What vampire and human were perhaps always meant to become." Alaric's sword wavered. For the first time in decades, doubt crept into his certainty. "And if I don't withdraw? If I command my army to attack regardless, then we will defend our people," Alara said softly. "All our people, human and vampire alike. And you will lose, uncle. Not because your strategy is flawed, but because you're fighting the tide of history itself." A long moment passed as Alaric weighed his options. Finally, with visible reluctance, He lowered his sword. I want assurances. Formal treaties. No more blood tribute, no vampire encroachment on human territories. You'll have them, Valerian agreed, and more. A new council with equal representation from both realms to govern the borderlands and resolve disputes. And your thirst? Alaric challenged. Your kind must feed. There are alternatives to hunting, Ilara interjected. Willing donors, animal blood, even alchemical substitutes that vampire scholars have developed but kept secret, fearing human reprisal. Alaric's eyes narrowed. You know their secrets now? I know both sides now, she replied, as does Valerian. That is the power of the bond, true understanding across the divide. Dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. As if responding to the coming light, the unnatural darkness surrounding them gradually dissipated, revealing confused but unharmed soldiers returning to their senses. 1 month, Alaric said finally. I will give you 1 month to prove this balance can work. My forces will withdraw to the border but remain vigilant. If there is any sign of vampire aggression, we attack without further discussion. Agreed. Valerian inclined his head. Ambassadors will arrive at your castle within 3 days to begin formal negotiations. Alaric turned to Ilara, something like regret crossing his features. And you, niece, where do your loyalties lie now? Ilara met his gaze steadily. With peace, with future generations of both our kinds, with the world we might build together, rather than the ashes we would create apart. Something in her words seemed to reach him. For a brief moment, the calculating politician fell away, revealing the man who had once held her as a child, who had grieved alongside her when her father died. You were always too wise for court life, he said quietly. Perhaps too wise for this old warmonger as well. With that, he turned and began issuing orders for the army's withdrawal, his voice betraying none of the doubt Ilara had glimpsed. He will try again, Valerian observed, as they watched the human forces begin to dismantle their camp. Perhaps not next month or next year, but eventually. Your uncle is not one to abandon ambition easily. No, Ilara agreed, but he is one who recognizes changing circumstances, and by the time he reconsiders, our work will have already transformed both realms. Valerian took her hand, the connection between them pulsing with shared purpose. There will be resistance on both sides. Centuries of fear and hatred won't dissolve overnight. Then it's fortunate we have time, Ilara replied, feeling the strange new rhythm that had replaced her heartbeat. Neither human pulse nor vampire stillness, but something that encompassed both and transcended either. As the sun rose fully over the borderlands, they stood between worlds, between day and night, life and death, past and future. The first light touched their joined hands, and for the first time in 5 centuries, Valerian didn't flinch from its caress. What shall we call ourselves? He wondered aloud. Neither vampire nor human seems adequate. Ilara smiled, watching as the golden light spread across the land that had known only conflict for generations. Perhaps we need no name at all. Perhaps it's enough to simply be what we've chosen to become. Together, they turned toward Castle Nightshade, visible in the distance as a silhouette against the dawn sky. The ancient fortress no longer seemed like a prison to either of them, but a beginning, the first cornerstone of a bridge between worlds that had stood apart for too long. The blood bond hummed between them, a promise and a challenge, an ending and a beginning. Whatever came next, they would face it as neither predator nor prey, but as equals in perfect eternal balance.